sort of recap, there is a little chat box on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. In there that you can type and engage with Jan and as we go. Have any questions, put any information in there, that's great. If you look across the top, you'll see two icons. You'll see a phone icon. That's if the audio starts to go a little bit hazy. If you're listening via your PC speakers, then if you click on that, that'll give you all the details to jump onto the telephone platform. And then finally, if you're looking across the top there, you have the button More. If you click in there, on that particular part, you'll see a section to take notes. If you click on there, that'll open up, and then you have a bottom section to make private notes. And if you fill that part in, then obviously the system will then send you an email with all the notes that you've made at the end of the webinar. That's sort of the housekeeping side. So if we then move on to the actual presentation, so I shall. Have you got? Can you see the screen, Jan?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Do you want me to do this? Do you want me to do the moving forward?
I can do the moving forward, but if you deal with the poll, that would be great. So we thought we'd start off by asking you, how much do you actually monitor what you eat and how it makes you feel? So this is a little poll. Get you started this morning.
Everybody thinking?
So most people saying yes informally. Very few people keeping a food diary. And a few who it's never occurred to. Okay. So the reason I ask that is that I think, part of the premise of this, let me talk about the series. Part of the premise of this series is that we often kind of get into the habit of doing things and we fail to notice actually how things we're doing make us feel and how it impacts our productivity, particularly things like our attention and memory. So we're going to take a break over the summer, but when we come back in September, we're going to cover some more in this series. So we're going to have a look at the role of exercise and what science is saying about how exercise impacts our brain and productivity and memory. We're also going to look at some really interesting research around just how much we move and some of the theories about why if we're moving, our brain is actually more effective. We're going to look at sleep, which is quickly becoming the kind of secret to success in business. And we're going to look at what's really our brain's capacity and how we can use the brain's energy much more. So I'll probably put those into two different webinars. So we'll do one on exercise and movement and one on sleep and capacity. Think about that for September and October. And if there are other things that people are interested in that I haven't mentioned there that are to do with sort of productivity and how our brain works from that point of view, just put it in the chat box and I'll see if we can incorporate it. So this is a model that we really like, and it's by a lady called Dr. Sarah McKay, who works out of Australia. She is actually a neuroscience scientist, but she's now turned her attention to looking at brain health, basically, and how we can make more of our brain. And what she's looking at is, if we want to have a healthy brain, there are kind of three big areas to think about. The first is, let me start at the bottom here, the bottom-up bit. So what basically we do with our system, i.e. our bodies, and what we're already born with, like our genes and hormones, will impact how we feel and how healthy and productive our brain is. So in that piece, Sarah puts things like nutrition, exercise, and sleep. So a lot of what we're going to cover in this series. And basically, the premise is, what you feed your body and the way you use your body will majorly impact the way your brain operates. So, Descartes and his separation between mind and body is really well and truly been proved to be wrong. The next bit she looks at is the outside in, so how things that are going on in our environment and our context impact the way our brain operates, so our social support system, the levels of stress, life events, education, and the environment we actually work in. And we know increasingly that things like people who have good relationships are both happier and live longer. So those are the sorts of bits of research that kind of impact there. And, of course, all the research around resilience and stress. And then the top-down bit is the way we actually think, and the control that we have over things like our emotions and feelings and our mindset and beliefs. And that's often an area that we talk about as if we have very little control, but I think increasingly research into things like mindfulness are telling us that has major impacts on the way we experience emotions and hence how we feel, and also has an impact on, the way we think has an impact on the neurochemicals in the brain. And, for example, Amy Cuddy's research, which would say, if we adopt a power pose, our brain thinks we are more confident and more powerful, and the chemicals that create that feeling are increased. So I think this is, a way of thinking about our brain and our brain health that Sarah's here that Dr. Sarah McKay's put together, and I think a useful way of you thinking about, if you monitor your day, how much are you impacting each of those three key areas: the top down, the way you're thinking; the inside out, the environment you're putting yourself in; and the kind of nutrition and exercise and so on that you're giving your brain. So I've got a few comments here. Sarah, I'm not so I think you're saying you can't hear. I'm not sure. If you're having trouble hearing, it may be you're on private. Richard, what does that mean?
It's just me and Sarah. I'm just checking that Sarah can actually engage on the chat and on the phone line if she needed to, and
okay.
she's able to. So.
Okay, good. All right.
So
sorry.
Everything's fine. Sorry.
Great. So my colleague, who we're just talking about here, is an expert in what we're going to talk about, but kind of shy about saying very much. So when I get stuck, she's going to come in and help me. Aren't you, Sarah?
I'll try.
So that's the kind of model to think about, I think. And if you want to look at Sarah McKay's work, different Sarah North is my colleague, I'd really recommend that. And there's the link to her website there. She writes a very entertaining blog as well. So let's look at food. So the premise of this research is that basically food is more than something that sustains our energy. It actually it can improve our health. B, it can improve our productivity and attention. And it can also improve our long-term kind of ability to live, basically. And a lot of the research that has been done in this area has been done around things like dementia. So a lot of it is related to energy. But there's a big piece of research that's been done that looked at something like 160 studies on food and looked for the common patterns and why what we eat impacting the way our brain actually processes information, improves our memory and makes, importantly, connections across the brain. And what this research seems to be saying is that particularly fatty foods, things like omega-3 fats, impact the link between the neurons. So, and this is the area where most of the memory functioning happens. And it impacts it in two ways. One, it improves those linkages. But secondly, because the brain generates a lot of antioxidants when it processes energy, and antioxidants can be very damaging to these cells, to these the links between the neurons or neurotransmitters. That certain foods will help that oxidization process and to avoid damage. So, in effect, help to avoid inflammation of those areas. So, some really interesting research there that's kind of saying the type of food we eat is directly impacting the way those neurotransmitters transmit to each other, both in a positive way, and it improves the synapses linkages, which improves memory and learning, and also in the way it kind of deals with the byproducts of energy in the brain, helping to make sure that we don't damage those connections. And the research is really saying, contrary to what many of us were brought up to believe, that fats are essential for brain health, and potentially the crisis that we're seeing in dementia and Alzheimer's could well be related to the fact that we've got a couple of generations of people who've been brought up saying that eating fats is bad for you, and that research has been found not only to be kind of fairly poor from a scientific point of view in terms of how a lot of that research was constructed, but was also sponsored by the low-fat lobby. So essentially by people who make low-fat foods. So the kind of rather conflicting or rather kind of hard to get your head around research is now saying that fats are essential for brain health, and that we should be making sure that we're eating a number of good fats, if you like, and the picture here shows some of those. So things like coconut oil, olive oil, oily fish, those sorts of things. And there is even research that kind of says eating a low-fat diet makes you fatter. So it's linked to obesity. So, Sarah, anything to add around fats?
No, I think if we move on to the next slide, you've got a couple of examples of the types of food. So definitely your walnuts, your avocado, and like Jan said, your coconut oil and your salmon, your wild Atlantic salmon, are really, really good foods for the brain. And dark chocolate, which we're moving on to.
Yes. And the research also says that, as I'd mentioned, low-fat foods aren't good for you, but things like saturated fats are also very poor for you. So let me just skip to this. And interestingly, the guy who did the research maintains that excessive calories also impact our productivity and our brain health. So it's not just eating, what we would call fast foods that's poor for you, but if you kind of eat too many calories, so the whole kind of thing around always leaving the table feeling slightly less than full, again, we're beginning to see some research that suggests that's a positive thing. And I think if you think from an evolutionary point of view, when our brain was developing, our ancestors probably, didn't eat a full meal every day, or 3 meals every day, and probably spent most of their time feeling kind of slightly hungry and motivated to go and find something else to eat. So any comments on the bit around fats, low fats and fatty acids? Any tips from people? So any tips for people who've given up eating meat and fish? Yeah, my son is in that category. So we get a lot of these good nutrients from nuts and other oils. So avocado, I think if you've given up eating meat and fish, avocado is really, really important for you. And a lot of the good nutrients are also in things like pulses and lentils and those types of legumes, I guess they call them. Sarah, anything else to add on that?
There's a couple of comments coming about from people saying, what about grass-fed butter? Absolutely. The research now shows that margarine, because margarine has the hydrogenated vegetable oils in, that the grass-fed butter is so much better for you. So they're the two fats of choice, actually, the avocado or the grass-fed butter.
Now, saturated fats are unhealthy, so you want these kind of good fats, if you like, the ones we're kind of showing in the picture here.
Yeah, you don't want the hydrogenated fats.
Yeah, adding flax seeds to smoothies, very good. I'm veggie and chronically anemic. Goodness me. Can I say one thing? Neither Sarah and I are medical professionals. We've really done this research around our own family's health. Both my parents died from dementia-related issues, and that got me and my sister onto a lot of research in terms of, what sorts of foods are good for you to try and avoid that fate ourselves. And I think, Sarah, you've done the same research for your family, haven't you? So if you are a vegetarian, I think, some of this research is really about what types of things you can eat and how you make sure that you eat enough of them. Yeah, people saying here coconut oil is awesome. Yeah, I don't know how we brought our children up without it, for those of you who are of my generation. So one of the things that the research is really beginning to tell us is that the mind diet, as it's called, is really kind of the way for brain health. And the mind diet is a combination of two different diet systems, one being the Mediterranean diet, which is high in vegetables, high in fruits and nuts, in oily fish and in lean meats, and interestingly in a glass of wine as well. And when they look at that, and the other diet, which is called DASH, which was a diet that was developed in the States to help people with high blood pressure, follows much the same types of foods, but without the wine and also without things like cola and those types of sugary drinks. So in the research that's looked at people who've been on these sorts of diets, some of them quite naturally because it's what they eat in the Mediterranean, for example, they've found that there are lower incidents of things like dementia-type related brain issues. But also, interestingly, that people who eat a diet which is higher in vegetables are both happier and their brains are more effective. So they did some research with a group of people where they asked them to keep a food diary and also a diary that talked about how they felt and how productive they were and how good they were at kind of their processing their job and what they had to do. And what they found is that the people that had more fruit and vegetables were not only happier, but also seemed to feel that they could deal more effectively with what their jobs were thrown at them. So, for those of you who are saying you're vegetarian, there is research that more of a vegetable-based diet might make you a happier person. But the MIND diet doesn't exclude meat and fish, but it keeps, it's very high on those vegetable, nuts and fruit elements. And if you like a glass of red wine, it also allows you to have that. Any other comments on that, Sarah? I mean, I think one of the things for me that this research points to is the importance of incorporating nuts into your diet.
I think that some of the research has come out with the reason why they think this diet works so well is that they think it might work to via the prevention of oxidative stress, which can lead to this chronic inflammation and neurodegeneration and all the diseases that you've mentioned. So I think it is around the keeping all the inflammation down, which is a whole new subject, so we won't go there, but that's where it's leading the research for this diet.
I notice we've got someone here saying they've lost their sound. Click on the telephone icon. It will probably almost certainly be your internet that's gone down.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've put further up the chat as well. There are the phone details as well. I've just put those on.
So, and Claire, interestingly, coming back from Australia, I was shocked to see the amount of ready meals in supermarkets can't be healthy. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with ready meals is we know that they tend to contain more sugar and more salt in order to give them some flavour, plus whatever they might do to keep them fresh for longer. So, yeah, I have to say I've stopped using those myself. Matthew, we're going to talk about nuts at the end, so can I just hold your question until then? And we've got Sarah Smith saying here she seems to be on the right track. Jolly good. So we talked about excess calories and fast food. The other thing that seems to be the enemy, if you like, is sugar. And I think most of you will have seen Jamie Oliver is on a bit of a campaign to get sugar reduced in children's foods. But increasingly we're seeing that sugar is the kind of new enemy, and that high levels of added sugar is really both bad for us from a calorie point of view, but also bad for the way our brain functions. It tends to cause a very quick sort of intake of glucose to the brain, and you get those sort of highs and lows that you may have experienced when 1 minute you're kind of overactive and the next minute you're kind of in a slump and you get the shakes. So those tend to be where your body has processed the food intake, in this case sugar, very quickly, and then is lacking sustenance to turn into glucose. And the same happens with certain types of foods. So when we eat foods that are processed slowly by the body, we tend to feel more energized. When we eat foods that the body has to really struggle to process, we get a slump in our brain activity whilst the focus is on processing those foods. So things that have a high kind of things like in the picture under excessive calories will tend to be those sorts of foods that you feel a bit sluggish about after you've eaten them. So I've got a question here: is sweeteners a good alternative or just as bad? Sarah, I might let you answer that one. I have my own views, but it's not based on any research I've read.
No, yeah, and I've certainly the things that I've come across is that that sweeteners they're not good. No, they are just as bad, and they are basically got for all sorts of other reasons on their own. Actually, I think they're all very much in the same family.
Yeah, and Linda's saying here, produce the same insulin response as sugar in the body. So there's nothing wrong with natural sugars, and you will get natural sugars in fruits and things. I think the bottom line here is balance in everything. So, if you eat 1 million dried dates, you're going to get a sugar hype. If you have some dried dates in your smoothie to sweeten it, you're probably not going to go far wrong. And we have a question, is brown sugar better than white sugar? Sarah?
No is the answer.
Avoid both. So, what are the memory foods? And I particularly like this because it kind of challenges some of our established thinking. And I think that's some of the reason why people are a bit confused about the whole thing about foods. So the things on this page have all been shown to help our memory and in some cases our attention. And if you think about productivity at work, unless your memory is working well and your productivity and you are able to concentrate and pay attention, then you're probably also able to be more productive. So my favorite one is coffee. I absolutely love coffee. So, yes, Terry, we'll get on to chocolate. So I love coffee, and, so many of my friends, I was with a friend over the weekend who was kind of trying to give up coffee, and I was saying, no, keep drinking your coffee. So most of this research came out of Harvard that said actually coffee is really useful for improving our memory, and lots of research that says our memory improves after we've drunk some coffee and up to 24 hours after we've had coffee. It also seems to help us put information into long-term memory. And again, it's two things there. We don't fully understand why, but we know the caffeine is a factor. And we also know that coffee is high in antioxidants. So again, as that thing that Sarah mentioned, helps you to reduce that inflammation in the brain. So we don't fully understand if there are also other micro-ingredients in coffee that are helping with this memory, but we know that both for people with brains that work well, coffee improves our memory, but also for people with dementia-type related illnesses, there's evidence that it can slow up the effects and even improve memory in the early stages. Nuts we've touched on. So walnuts have particularly always been associated with intellectual processing, partly I think because they look a bit like a brain when they're opened and shelled. But again, all nuts contain lots of micro-ingredients or microchemicals that help with both our general health but also memory and brain health. And there's some recent research that would suggest that people who regularly incorporate nuts into their diet tend to be less likely to become obese. And they may even help people to reduce weight alongside other kind of approaches of combinations of food. And some of that research tends to suggest it's because they tend to kind of fill us up and are slow to be processed, so we stay feeling full for longer. Sarah, anything else on nuts?
I'm sorry, I was just replying to some of the coffee and the chocolate ones on the left. So hopefully you've got those.
Yeah. So nuts are a good thing. And one of the, we've all talked earlier about our homemade granola, but how else can you incorporate a few nuts into your diet? And then the one, because we've got loads of chat about it coming up here, is chocolate. So chocolate's interesting. There was some research that came out of, I think, Aberdeen University that said any chocolate is associated with reduced chance of heart attacks and strokes. But the real research is saying dark chocolates is what you should be incorporating into your diet. Again, because it's very high in antioxidants and which again seems to help with brain health and things like memory and attention. So you need to look for chocolate that's 70% pure?
Yes.
Cocoa, and also that's been processed in a way where those antioxidants haven't been destroyed in the processing, which is usually raw chocolate is usually higher in that. So actually look on the label and see what it's saying about the way it was processed. Sarah, anything else on that?
No, all the benefits are the 70 plus. 85 is fantastic. I think some people who are very brave can do 90%, but at least minimum 70% raw cacao is where you get the benefits from.
And I can see Hannah saying, unfortunately, she has to go. There will be a recording of this on the website within about 48 hours, Hannah. And then turmeric is almost a kind of wonder spice. It's associated with, again, good memory, good brain health, reduced inflammation. It's it's healing, stops different types of bacteria. And for people in countries like India, where it's part of their everyday diet, the incidence of illnesses that are dementia-related are something like 1 in 100 as opposed to 1 in 14 in the West. I think the challenge for most of us is how do we incorporate in our diet. I'm a great fan of stirring it into a few sautéed mushrooms for breakfast on toast. You can make tea with it. You can also get turmeric shots in places like Whole Foods. It's quite good mixed in with something like soya milk or coconut milk in almost a latte. And the important thing about it, about how you take it, is it's quite hard to incorporate into our to absorb. And so taking it with black pepper and some sort of oil like coconut oil increase that absorption. I think I'm right in saying, Sarah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's pepper because it's a piperine actually in the pepper. So just a little tiny bit of sprinkles of pepper is all you need to make it really effective. And then to make it even more effective is the oil. So coconut oil goes very naturally with it, but butter, any kind of oil at all, really.
Okay, so I think the tea is also a really great thing to do. And then finally, rosemary for memory. I could see earlier up in the chat someone was chatting about this. So from ancient times, rosemary has been associated with good memory. And I think in Roman times, people used to wear rosemary garlands before they took exams or where they needed to remember speeches and things. So you may look slightly odd walking into work with rosemary tucked behind your ear. But some practical ways in which to incorporate rosemary into your everyday diet. So again, you can make a tea with it. I'm a great fan of burning rosemary oil in a oil burner in my office, and I certainly feel that helps me to focus and to remember things. And there's some research out of the University of Northumbria that looked at people who'd taken in rosemary, so they were testing their blood to see how much rosemary had been absorbed from natural oils, and then tested their memory and attention, and found that particularly when people were also in a good mood, that tests of cognitive ability increased for those people who had high levels of the rosemary essence effectively absorbed into their bloodstream. So quite an interesting one, that, and good to cook with, but also get some of that pure rosemary oil. Sarah, any other comments on memory foods?
No, they're pretty much the main ones that we certainly concentrate. I think if you just maybe just take one food. I think trying to incorporate all of this in your diet all at once is quite a lot to do. And I think if you just take one and concentrate. So for me, I really concentrate on the turmeric. It's such a really powerhouse. And then once you've done one, you can move on to another. But these are certainly, for what Jan and I have come across, as really helpful foods for the brain and the memory.
So, thanks, Sarah. That leads us on to really a sort of our sum up for creating healthier eating habits. So we know that just because we have the information, it doesn't mean that we suddenly kind of start eating better. And as Sarah says, it's much easier to change one habit and then move on to something else. And this is a list of sort of some hints and tips, if you like. Don't rely on willpower. Take those unhealthy foods off your shopping list. If you shop online, take them off of your favourites, and leave them for times when you really can't avoid temptation. But if they're in your cupboard, you're more likely to eat them. If they're in your desk at work, you're definitely going to eat them. So also look at sort of using organic suppliers. Abel and Cole, we are great fans of. But anything that kind of points you in the direction of buying kind of healthier foods and having those around you, rather than making sort of decisions when you're hungry or in a hurry. It's much easier to snack on healthy foods if you kind of organise yourself and take a container into work in the mornings. In the days when I regularly worked in an office, it always shocked me at the amount of sort of rubbish, basically, people would consume, partly because they're bored and they need a break. So when you are bored and you need a break at work, if you've got a bowl of nuts or a plate of kind of ready cut-up vegetables, and you've taken that into the office ahead of time, you're more likely just to reach for it, and it will be easy. And now we know about dark chocolate, you can include a bar of that in your weekly pack. Important to make eating decisions before you're hungry. When your brain is low in glucose and you need energy quickly, you're much more likely to go for something like pasta or a burger or a slice of pizza or something that's, is going to satisfy you quickly but may not always be the best choice. And we know that if we think ahead of time and make a decision about where we're going to eat or where we're going to buy our lunchtime food, then we're more likely to make good choices. And if you share what you're planning to do with your colleagues, you're more likely to keep to what your good intentions are. We know from the science research that people who have publicly made a statement about what they want to do like to be seen as consistent. And so if you've told people you're going to start eating nuts and dark chocolate, for example, rather than a hamburger or or whatever else your typical habits are, then you're more likely to keep to your goals. And then because our brain gets spikes and drops in blood sugar, sort of eating small amounts throughout the day rather than a big meal is likely to also do better, and you won't be in a situation where when you get a drop in blood sugar, your productivity also drops, and your attention will also drop. So those are some of the things we wanted to see. Richard, I sent a list of links. Is it possible to put those up?
Yeah, I'll just try to find those
people.
So I think that's a really good. They're really everything that you've mentioned today. Those links, if Richard's able to put them up, will able people to go off and have a read and little more of a further read, and that will give you more information around what Jan's talked to you about today.
Just putting them up now.
Thank you. Oh, I've got something here. It's Nicola. Hi, Nicola. Wonderful ideas, but certainly tricky to apply as an expat in the Philippines. I would imagine you get quite good fruit, Nicola. And I'd be quite interested in whether there's some interesting nuts out there that you can incorporate into your diet. So Richard's now put up this list of links. So there's a couple here to a couple of blogs that we like. The one we've already mentioned, Your Brain Health, which is Dr. Sarah McKay. And Kale and Coco is one of our favorites. They review some of the latest research on brain health or bodily health generally, but they're very much focused on the brain. And they also give you a recipe that goes with the research. Each comes out roughly once a week, I guess. So we really recommend those for the kind of, if you're interested in the science, but it delivered up in a fairly kind of user-friendly way. And then the first one there is that research on low fats, and then the research on omega-3 oils, and some of the other things we've talked about here, especially each of those memory foods like rosemary and chocolate and so on. We will put up on our website an article that summarizes some of this, and we'll have some of the links. And as we mentioned earlier, the webinar will be up on our website in about 48 hours. So any last questions from people?
I'll stop putting the links so that as they come up.
So, Nicola, you're getting loads of advice. Mangoes and pineapples is where it's at, it seems. So we've got a couple of minutes